guys, it's Shelley here. Welcome to my channel and thank you for joining me today. I come to you with another requested video for how I colour backgrounds with Distress ink. I'll be working in Tales from the Forest Kingdom by Hannah Carlson on the Fairy Dust page. I don't always do this, but in this situation I have prepared my page with drawing gum and I have blocked out the line art where I don't want the Distress ink to go over, and I've used a brush to apply the drawing gum. I'll be using 3 shades of Distress ink: Cracked Pistachio, Stormy Sky and Black Soot. And I'll be applying them with the blending brushes as I show on screen, rather than using the blending tools and sponges that come from Ranger. I tend to use both, like the blending tools from Ranger as well as the brushes in different situations. In this page, it's not absolutely necessary for me to use these brushes. However, I thought that the larger brushes will come handy just to apply the Distress ink quickly around the edges of the page. So I decided to use the brushes in this case. I feel that when I use the brushes, it's more useful when I need it on a page where I haven't applied the drawing gum to block out the line art and I want to avoid the distress ink going onto the line art. And I would use the really small brushes that you can get with this set to sort of go between the line art and try and avoid basically putting any colour onto the line art. So in this case it's not absolutely necessary, but I just thought using the large brushes will be handy. It'll be quick for the edges. Drawing gum is usually used by artists who do watercolour painting, and they apply their drawing gum onto their work in areas where they don't want any of the paint to get onto, so that where they can maintain the white of the paper. I got the idea of using the drawing gum from a friend on Instagram, and she said she had tried using it, successfully using it with Distress ink, and so thanks to her I tried it out and it works for me as well. I don't always use drawing gum for my Distress ink pages. Sometimes I don't use it and I allow the Distress ink to get onto the line art, which is perfectly fine because you can use them for basing as well, and you can colour over them with pencil. So depending on the colours you're using for the background, if you don't mind it going onto your line art, you don't need to cover up the line art with the drawing gum, and you can just use your pencils and colour over the top of the Distress ink. In this case, I thought that it was a simple page where I could apply the drawing gum without too much trouble, and I'm thinking of doing a gold frame, so I thought I'd keep that area clean without any Distress ink, and also just to show you the idea of using drawing gum, that you can use it with Distress ink, and at the end I'll show you how I remove the drawing gum as well, so that if you did want to try it out for yourselves, you can do. I like to do my backgrounds first in majority of my pages, because for a few reasons really, and I think I've mentioned this quite a few times in some of my colour alongs, or you may have noticed in some of my colour alongs that I do tend to do my backgrounds first. The first reason is that I find backgrounds still quite challenging for me. Thinking up colours to use for the backgrounds, doing the backgrounds, what medium to use for a background. And so I find that once I get the background done, the challenging part for me done, the rest of the page is a little bit more relaxed. It's not that I don't enjoy doing backgrounds. In fact, I actually do enjoy doing backgrounds. It just takes a little bit more thinking or planning from my side to do a background still. So I like to get it done, especially if you're going to spend ages on a page colouring the foreground, and then you come to do the background and you have absolutely no idea, or you don't have any motivation left, and within a few minutes you could mess up your page. So for me, I like to do the background first and then carry on and colour the foreground. I'm less likely to lose motivation that way on a page as well. The second reason is, as you know, I do use Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer pencils, which are watercolour pencils. I have tried using Distress ink after colouring the foreground. So this particular point is mainly for Distress inks. But yeah, so I have tried early on in my colouring journey to first colour a page in with my pencils and then use Distress ink at the end. And I learned this from Karen from Zucchini Kitty. Everyone knows her. And unfortunately for me, it did cause my pencils to smudge. And I think that is because they are watercolour pencils. So whenever I use, and majority of the times I do, use Albrecht Dürer pencils, I tend to do and if I'm using Distress ink, I tend to use do the background first to avoid the smudging of my pencils. The second reason is, with Distress ink specifically, obviously, when I come to do the splash effect on certain pages, you know, where you put the water effect, you splash some water or spray some water onto the page to cause that, and then pick up the water from the page to cause that little watercolor effect or droplets effect. I can't do that after I've coloured in a page because I'm using watercolor pencils, because the Albrecht Dürer are not permanent. Once you've applied them, they can still get activated with water. And so if you were to do the water splash effect after you've coloured with the pencils, it will affect your colouring. So I do recommend that if you're going to use Albrecht Dürer pencils and you want to use Distress inks for backgrounds, probably try doing the Distress inks in the first case, and doing your water splash effect if you're going to do water splash effect for that page, and then go in with your pencils. And then finally, the third reason I would say I like to do backgrounds first is because it sort of gets rid of all that empty space, and so it basically fills up all that empty space, and so you can see the foreground of the illustration clearly. You know what's remaining to colour, you know what needs to be coloured. It just makes it easier, in my opinion. It makes it easier, especially on a busy page or an intricate, detailed page, to block out the empty space with colour, so it's easier to see all the details that need to be coloured in. I find it easier to tackle, and I find it a bit more relaxing as well once the background is done. I find colouring in the page more chilled out, and I can just enjoy colouring in the line art. For this page, for the background, I decided to make the edges of the page, mainly the top and bottom, because we have a bit more space in those areas, make them darker and go in lighter as we go towards the center of the page to where the bottle of fairy dust is. And so in the first instance, I applied the lightest shade of Distress ink all over the page, just going in lighter towards the center, and then I started applying the other two shades, so it's Stormy Sky and Black Soot, to the edges of the paper, to darken up those areas and create that effect of the dark outside and the light inside in the center of the page. And I find that this, once we start putting color on the foreground, this will make the illustration, or that bottle of fairy dust, it will pop because the area around it is quite light. So we sort of focus in on the fairy dust. That was the idea basically that I had. With Distress ink, it's important to have quite a light touch until you get a hang of it, because you don't want to create areas of very dark Distress ink which you're not able to blend out. So if you keep a light touch to your blending process, everything will blend in really well. And you will see me every now and then dab off a little bit of color to my right on a spare sheet of paper to make sure I'm not putting too much color down at one go. especially for the distressings, which are a little bit more juicy. So I found when I was doing this page, I think my Stormy Sky shade is drying out a little bit because I didn't seem to be getting that much colour at one go. So it took me ages when I was using the Stormy Sky shade, and applying that to the paper. It took me ages to apply it, even though it wasn't such large areas for it. But I think it's drying out, so I need to get a re-inker to make it a bit more juicy again. But the cracked pistachio was quite juicy, and so I did need to dab it off a little bit to the side before I applied it to the paper. So just make sure you're not picking up too much colour, and check how much colour is on it by just dabbing it on the side if you really need to. I usually apply the distressing from the edges going in towards the center of the page where possible. And I have some spare sheets of paper just on the back of the page to avoid me getting it onto the page below in any, if I was being too messy, it might go onto those pages. It's not going to leak through, it doesn't bleed through. Not distressing. Distress oxides do bleed through, could bleed through, but not distressing. Unless you add water in certain pages. I've noticed that you do get a little bit of bleed through when you do the water splash effect. But anyways, with the spare piece of paper on the back of the page, I tend to first apply a little bit of distressing onto that spare paper and then come onto the page, the edge of the page, and work my way to the center of the page. And that's how I apply it, making sure I'm not putting too much colour at one go and that it's all going to blend really well. Once I've applied all 3 shades of the colours in the areas that I want to, I go over with the same colours again, just to make sure that everything has blended in well and there's no sharp transitions between each shade of distressing that we've used. So I do tend to go back in. So I do keep in mind that I'm going to be going over the areas with the same colours again, which will make those particular areas darker again. So I try not to put too much colour down on my first layers, with that in mind, knowing that I'm going to go back over it and it's going to get darker again. So depending on how intense you want the colour, just keep that in mind, that you may go over with the same colours again to make sure everything is blended nicely. The transitions between the colours are good, are well blended, they're not sharp transitions, and therefore adding those additional layers of the colour will make your shades darker. In situations where I don't use the drawing gum, my process takes a lot longer. Depending on how busy the page is, it may take a lot longer because I'm in certain areas where I want to avoid my distressing going onto the line art. I have to make sure I'm working a little bit slower, making sure I'm being a bit more careful with smaller brushes and making sure I don't go over the line art. Obviously, if I'm going to use it as a base, that's fine. I just go over the line art and it's quick. But because of the drawing gum in this case, I'm able to just go quickly and go over the line art, because I know that the drawing gum is going to protect the line art below and I'm not going to get the colour. As long as I've applied it well, I'm not going to get the colour transfer onto those areas which I don't want it to go onto. Once I'm happy with the blending, with the colours that I've applied and I'm done, then in this situation where I have used the drawing gum, I would go ahead and remove the drawing gum. But for this page, I wanted to just show you the effect I was going for, because I wanted to do a sprinkle effect with white ink and some gold metallic paint. And usually I would do this bit right at the end of my page, so after I've coloured in with the pencils. But in this case, just to show you what the background's going to look like completed, I decided I'll just do the sprinkle effects and show you what it's going to look like. So before I remove the drawing gum, I'll sprinkle the page with my Winsor & Newton white ink and my Arteza metallic watercolour paints, the gold colour. and I do that off camera because I don't have a setup where I can do it on camera, and I'll show you what it's going to look like with the photo on screen. And the sprinkle effect I'm going to do, I'm trying to limit it to outside that frame that we have that surrounds the fairy dust. So I don't want the sprinkle effect within that circle, and so I'll be using my hand or piece of paper just to cover up that area, and then do the sprinkle on the outside to try and avoid bits going in. It'll still go in a little bit, but that's okay as long as majority of my sprinkle effect is on the outside. And finally, once that's done, all we need to do is remove the drawing gum, which is as easy as just using your finger to gently rub it off. And you'll see when I'm doing that process that you'll see stringy bits that are still attached to the paper. Don't try and pull them. They will probably tear your paper because it's quite sticky. So you just be patient and rub it with a finger, and you'll see the little crumbs coming off the page. And yeah, you'll have a nice and clean line art below. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I had read somewhere that you shouldn't leave drawing gum on your paper for too long. It can tear. I'm not sure where I would have read it, or did I hear it maybe one of the artists who do watercolor painting on YouTube. I won't remember, but I'm sure I'd heard somewhere that you shouldn't leave your drawing gum for too long on the paper. So I try and do it pretty much straight away. I do my background, so I apply the drawing gum, I let it dry. It doesn't take long to dry, even just 5 minutes or so is fine. Then do the distressing, and then once you're finished, just remove the drawing gum straight away. Even if you're not going to colour that page in straight away, I would just remove it. Don't leave it on your page. And that's my process for doing a distress ink background. I don't always use the drawing gum, but in this case I did, just to give you the idea if you needed to use it in any situation. It does work. It works well with the distress ink. And I really like how my background has turned out, actually. I wasn't so sure about the colour for fairy dust, for a fairy dust page. Maybe I should have gone for pinks, but I've been using so much pinks recently that I just decided, let me go for a different background in this case. I haven't thought about what I'm doing for the bottle. I know the frame is going to be gold, but I'm still thinking about what to do for the contents of the bottle. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope this video was useful. I hope it gave you some new ideas to try out for yourself. I really like how it turns out, it has turned out and how it's looking. So I'm actually looking forward to colouring this page soon, hopefully. So thanks again for the request, for the suggestion of doing this video. And until my next video, take care. Bye bye.